Hello and welcome to another Canadian Racing podcast. I'm your host, Sean Blight. Thank you for watching. I truly appreciate it. On today's show, we're talking about the Race of Champions Modifieds. Their season kicks off next Saturday. It's the 72nd annual Lucas Oil Race of Champions 250. And help me talk about it, we've got the voice of the Race of Champions Modifieds, Mr. Dave Buchanan, Keith Lussier from ModifiedsDaily, and later on I'll be joined by driver Jake Lutz, who is running for Rookie of the Year honors as well as championship hopeful with the Advantage Motorsports number 14 car. So the show today is broken up into two segments. The first segment will be myself, Keith, and Dave talking about the series and modifieds in general. And then Jake joins us for segment number 2. So I hope you enjoy it. It's a really fun conversation, and if you like modifieds, you're going to want to listen to this. All right, I'm pleased to be joined now by Dave Buchanan, the play-by-play voice of the ROC Modified series. How's it going, Dave?
Good, Sean. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to this season.
Absolutely. And from ModifiedsDaily on Instagram, if you're a fan of modified racing, you probably should follow this guy if you haven't already. Keith Lussier, thanks for coming on.
Hey, glad to be here, man.
I'll start with you, Keith. You're up in the Northeast, where modifieds are obviously king. So it probably goes without saying, but how did you get into modified racing?
Oh, it kind of got passed down to me from my dad. He was always going to Thompson Speedway when he was a kid. My grandfather was always bringing him. And I was born in 86. My first race I went to at Thompson was in 89. It was like a family fun weekend type deal. But my first like real race that I went to was World Series of 91. And that was the first tour mod race I ever saw. And I had never seen race cars like that up until that point. Like just the loudness, and you go home and your ears are ringing for hours afterwards. Like, had never experienced anything like that as a kid, and just totally hooked on it from there on out. And Thompson Speedway's pretty much been home for me, ever since. It's a place I love to go. And ModifiedsDaily kind of came along naturally. When COVID hit, I was working in the music industry and everything kind of stopped for us. There was no gigs. There was nothing. So I had all this time and I was like, I've always really wanted to do something in the racing scene, especially with modifieds. So I just was like, there's not very many pictures of modifieds on Instagram. Like that was kind of the whole thing about it at first. So I just started posting pictures. And it's kind of just evolved into this, like everybody knows about it type of thing now. And it's kind of crazy to me. Like all these people come up to me and they're like, oh, hey, I ModifiedsDaily. And it's like, oh, I've never met you, but hey, man, like it's crazy. So yeah, it's just one of those things that kind of happen naturally. I mean, if COVID's a natural thing, like, just had the time to do it, and now it is what it is. And I put a lot of effort and a lot of like kind of coverage of just all the modified series in general. I try to like touch on a little bit, and I just feel modified racing could be so much more popular than it is. Like if you would have the Whelen Modified Tour on like national TV, like especially last year's battle with Silk and Bonsignor, like how could people not love that? Like I would love to see more fans come to the sport, and I would love to see modified racing back on like national TV again, like it used to be in the 90s. So hopefully we'll get there again someday.
Yeah, for sure. Dave, I'll go to you. You're currently a sideline reporter on WGR for the Buffalo Bandits, the National Lacrosse League. You've worked with the Buffalo Sabres, I believe, as well. So what came first, I guess, the chicken or the egg, the broadcasting or the love of racing?
Yeah, love of racing. I grew up at the other end of modified country. Kyle's in New England. I'm in Western New York. So, but still modified hotbed at my home track, Lancaster Speedway. I grew up going there as a kid. My parents started working there. Originally, my dad on the drag racing side, actually, as an official, but started working in the beer stand on Saturday nights. So I started going to the stock car races on Saturdays along with my brothers. And announcing is always something I was interested in from watching television. Bob Jenkins on ESPN and everything, and announcing races with my Hot Wheels cars in my bedroom growing up. So when I was about 14 years old, I told the then announcer at Lancaster Speedway that I wanted to do that, and they took an interest. That someone as young as me was as interested in becoming a race announcer. So in 1996, when I was 14 years old, I became the junior announcer, started announcing the big wheel races at Lancaster. 2 years later, they started paying me to announce the stock car races. So that was 1998. I worked at Lancaster. I've worked at Wyoming County International Speedway. I've worked on the dirt at Ransomville Speedway. I've worked in Canada at Merrittville and Humberstone.
Mhm.
I worked at Lake Erie Speedway on a weekly basis for a couple of seasons. And the Race of Champions, of course, is a big part of modified racing, especially here in New York State. And I started getting involved with the Race of Champions weekend, which was then at Oswego Speedway in about 2001, 2002. And announcing that event every year kind of became a yearly deal for me from '02 on. And then when Joe Skotnicki bought the series in 2016, I eventually moved in as the series announcer because the series never really had an announcer that traveled, and
Mhm.
Joe added that when he took over the series in 2016. So I hopped aboard, and so I've been the series announcer for the Race of Champions since 2017. And it's just part of modified racing, and then in addition to working in motorsports, I went to college for a communications degree. Worked part-time at WGR as a producer. I hosted a talk show about racing for 13 years. And yeah, that led me to the lacrosse world. I started out as a fan of the Buffalo Bandits, the National Lacrosse League, the box lacrosse team. I started covering the team for the radio station and eventually got started helping out, filling in on their broadcast. And then by 2018, I was a regular sideline reporter. So I've been doing that for 5 years on top of the racing stuff.
You and I, Dave, probably would have crossed paths in our younger days when my dad was always a big super modified and modified fan. And I remember one of my earliest racing memories was my first trip to Oswego Speedway to see the modifieds there, and Rick and Jeff Fuller and Jan Leedy, like those were kind of the guys back then. And I made a lot of trips to Lancaster Speedway where Siege Fidanza was always winning, and Charlie Rudolph was another big name there.
Mhm.
So yeah, modified's been a big part of my life. And even though this is the Canadian racing podcast, I do want to focus on a lot of the big events in the Northeast United States and some of the races and series that don't get enough coverage. And the Race of Champions is one of those. So Dave, we'll talk about next weekend is the big 250 lapper at Lake Erie Speedway to kick off the season. Kind of what are some of the storylines you're looking at going into this season? Some of the drivers to watch. We're going to have Jake Lutz on here in a little bit, who's running for Rookie of the Year and in a championship. So I'll start with you then.
Yeah, coming up a week from Saturday, April 13th, Lake Erie Speedway. This is actually the 2022 edition of the
Right.
Race of Champions 250, the twice postponed event.
Yep.
Hopefully, we'll get it in and get this one in the history books as the 72nd running. So we've already run the 73rd running, and the 74th is scheduled for this September. But yeah, April 13th, Lake Erie Speedway, plus TQ Midgets and Street Stocks. Tickets are available, I believe, at LakeErieSpeedway.com. This is the longest running race in North America besides the Indianapolis 500, like 73 years of history and tradition. It's the big one, the big silver cup you go for being the winner, the El Gerber Memorial Trophy. This is one of the big events in modified racing. So it should be a great show at Lake Erie on April 13th. Andy Jankowiak won the event a couple of years ago. Patrick Emerling's the most recent winner. I'm not sure if Patrick's going to be there. I don't know what his Xfinity schedule looks like, and if he's got a modified ride lined up for the event. But there's still going to be a ton of stars going at it. You look, I'm sure Andy J will be there. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting.
Today.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the ARCA schedule was because I know Andy's focusing on that this year too.
Yeah.
But you've got Jack Ely coming back. He finished second in points last year to Zane Ziner. Zane Ziner's a defending series champion. He would love to win that race again. He last won it when it was at Oswego. He's had some close calls there in recent history. Matt Hirschman obviously is around. Big Money, who's won that race more than anybody, will be one to watch. Then you've got guys like George Score III, who's going to be a regular full-time on the series this year. George is a former track champion at Lake Erie Speedway, not in a modified, but in a late model, actually. Did that about 10 or 12 years ago, I believe, off the top of my head. But George is a former late model track champion, so he's got a lot of laps there. He's also done really well with the open wheel stuff, whether the sportsman modified or the modified. You got Paulie Hartwig III, the youngster out of New Jersey. Paulie ran really well in that event last season. Was battling inside the top 5 and top 10 for most of the day last year with his number 73 car out of New Jersey. And then you've got, the couple of interesting rides on the series this year are going to be coming out of a team owned by Brian DePasquale out of Western New York. He's got 2 hired guns this year. He's got Mike Leedy and Tony Hanberry. Tony and Mike are 2 talented veteran drivers out of the central New York area. Mike would love to win the Race of Champions 250, an event just like his dad won in years gone by. Tony's won a lot of big modified events as well too. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll be, the first time out for that team with those 2 drivers. They're not complete. It's not a completely inexperienced team, but it is a limited operation at least when it comes to experience. But they should be ones to watch as well too. Darrell Lewis Jr., Danny Knoll Jr. It's going to be a great show, and the racing in Lake Erie is always phenomenal because with that progressive banking, you get lots of side-by-side racing. So really looking forward to next Saturday.
And I'll turn it over to you, Keith. I'm not sure how familiar maybe you are with the Western New York sort of things. You're heading to a race this weekend, I think you said, at Thompson?
Yeah, I'll be at Thompson Saturday and Sunday. Weather permitting, I mean, it looks pretty good as of now. But the schedule is looking really good. Tri-Track on Saturday and the Whalen Modified Tour Sunday. I took a look over the entry list. It looks like a lot of guys are running both, which is awesome. I'd love to see that. Icebreaker, man, it's always a pretty good weekend. I'm interested to see how Hirschman does at Thompson. It's not really a track I've seen him run at a lot. He was there, I think, once last year, and that's when he ended up breaking his arm in the red and yellow 60 car. So I'm interested to see how he does there. Woody, Silk, Bonsignor, the Silk and Bonsignor battle for the tour race. I'm sure it's going to be great. Those 2 are excellent shoes at Thompson. Who else? I think Woody's going to do good in the tri-track race. Hirschman will probably do pretty good in the tri-track race. As far as the other cars go, they're not racing SKs at Thompson this year. They've switched that over to the 604 mods, which, as far as I know, is similar to a 602, but with a bigger carburetor. I guess that's what I've been told. I've never seen those cars race. So I'm interested to see how those are at Thompson. I would assume they're somewhere between like an SK Light and an SK speed wise, I guess. I'm not really quite sure, but that should be a good show. And the full body cars always put it on good at Thompson. I think is it Pass is going to be there for their 75 lap race, and that's usually pretty decent. It's not bad. Icebreaker, and then other events I plan on going to is the Northeast Classic at Loudon. That should be awesome. It's like a Friday night show, but like they bring all the cars to Loudon. Like that's crazy to see like mini stocks at Loudon. Like what the hell? It's awesome. So that's kind of an oddball kind of thing, and I kind of like those like quirky races. Like I'd love to go to like a run what you brung like modified event, kind of like what they used to do back in the day, and like Evans and Troy would show up with the wings on the tops of their like regular modifieds. Like I always thought that was pretty cool. Um, Somebody else I'm looking to do pretty good this year in the Whale Modified Tours, Pat Emerling in the Troyer house car, the number one. That car is a stout piece. I know it's supposedly an R&D car for Troyer, so they got all kinds of magical stuff in there that they test out. I believe that was the same, not the same car, but McKennedy last year drove the Troyer house car. I believe it was some crazy R&D car, and the frame was made of chromoly, and they told him like, yeah, you can run it this year, but you can't bring it back next year or something like that. So I guess that's this year's version of their house car, and it's really good. He's not really had the greatest luck the last 2 weeks. I think he wrecked both at Smyrna and last week at Richmond. He definitely wrecked. But I expect good things out of him. Austin Beers as well. Kid is crazy good, like really good driver, and it's like like the teenagers have just taken over modified racing, north, south, all over the place. Like it's insane to see, 15-year-olds, 19-year-olds winning these huge races. Like,
and that's something that I wanted to talk about as well, because I know me personally, a few years ago, I was a little concerned about maybe some of the lack of young talent kind of going into the modifieds, maybe being steered into other forms of racing. Dave, I wanted to ask you personally about Paulie Hartwig. You mentioned him earlier. I was at Port Royal a couple of weeks ago and saw him run the Sportsman Dirt Modifieds.
Yeah.
I had a great chat with his mom at Lancaster last year. Some people think he's maybe too young to be running these, but I mean, I'm of the mind that you can get hurt playing football, you can get hurt playing hockey. The kid's got the talent. Fourth in points last year. Talk a little bit about Paulie and kind of his development, what you've seen in him.
Yeah, it's amazing what that young man could do. I mean, I first got wind of him really in iRacing. You talked about the pandemic before, and that announcing iRaces, and that's why I first learned of Paulie Hartwig. But he's come in last year with a regular ride on the Race of Champions Modified Series and was running up front consistently. You talked about how well he did in the point standings. And like I said, in last year's 250, he's running up there side by side, challenging for a top 5 finish. The big thing with me with the kids, as long as they're doing it and they're not posing a danger to their competitors, their parents could put the fastest piece underneath them, but if they can't drive and they're wrecking everybody, then they shouldn't be out there. But with Paulie, I don't see that. I mean, I've never seen every race he's run. I don't see what he does on the dirt, but he really handled himself professionally, at least with the Race of Champions series last year. So, I think he's got a lot of talent, and if he keeps proving himself, I can't wait to see him move up. Last year at Mahoning Valley Speedway, we saw him in action for one of the first times with the Race of Champions series, and then we saw Andy Lewis Jr. in a modified too at Mahoning Valley in a team car to Austin Beers out of their shop there on Mud Lane in Northampton. But Andy Lewis Jr., there's a name to remember. Part of the Lewis Racing family out of Ontario, New York, third generation driver. His dad, Andy Lewis Sr.'s run Race of Champions Sportsman for years. His uncle, Daryl Jr., is a regular on the series. His grandfather, Daryl Sr., has been competing at the Race of Champions going back to Pocono in the 80s. Andy I think he's got a lot of potential, just like Paulie does. He started in our 602 modified division, cleaned up there for a couple of years, and now he's running with the regular sportsman, doing a really good job. So I think there is some young talent, and Jake Lutz too. And I didn't even mention Jake in the 14 team when I was previewing next Saturday. They won. That's the car that won last year's Race of Champions 250 with Patrick Emerling behind the wheel. That team owned by Joey Stearns and Billy Putney is the crew chief. But Jake's got a lot of talent too. We saw it quickly. He even won a race last year at Lancaster with the Race of Champions modified. So there is a lot of young talent. Could use a few more fresher faces to go along with it, but there's definitely some talent in the pipeline. But that's the other thing, is keeping them at modified racing. Unfortunately, they want to go like you see, like Max McLaughlin or some of these other younger guys. They want to go race late models, whether it's pavement or dirt. Because the late model stuff pays more. They want to do the ARCA stuff. So that's the other hard part, is keeping them in modified racing.
Right, for sure. And I wanted to bring up, Dave, I don't know if you saw the Wheeling race at Richmond last weekend. I did want to talk about that when Jake comes on, because he was actually crewing on the 14 that Bobby Santos was driving. And you hear a lot of people complain about Richmond's a terrible track. The NASCAR guys, they can't pass there. The modifieds put on an amazing show.
Best race of the weekend.
And Silk were battling for the lead for the last 50 laps back and forth. So you can't tell me it was the track, because the modifieds were awesome. And it's just, what do we need to do to get more people's eyeballs on the series, like you were mentioning earlier, Keith?
Yeah, I think and they do run the races. They run reruns, I think, on USA at some oddball hour during the day. And I mean, that's good. You know what I mean? It's good they're on TV, but I just think if you were to put one of those races on a good TV slot and did some good marketing and advertising behind it, I don't think there's any way people are not going to enjoy that and want to see more of it. And it's crazy to me that NASCAR doesn't really, they've been better in the last few years, but it's crazy that they don't give more push to that series, because like you said, that was the best race of the weekend at Richmond, the modified race between Xfinity and Cup. And I fell asleep halfway through the Cup race. I just couldn't do it. But the modified race, I for lack of a better term, at the edge of my seat pretty much the whole race. It was pretty good. And the same thing with New Smyrna. It was another good race. I wish we just even one race, the first race of the year, or something. Just give us something. It's crazy how it used to be on ESPN, back in the late 90s, right on ESPN, Stafford Sizzler was live on ESPN or ESPN.
I'm old enough to remember TNN.
Yeah, TNN too. Hell yeah. Yep. But so hopefully we get some of that, because I think the modifieds deserve it. They deserve their shine, because it's a great series.
Yeah.
It's funny you talk about TV. The only modified race that was actually live on what we call linear television last year was actually the Race of Champions 250 on MAV TV. That was the only modified race on live television last season, because all of the NASCAR stuff is on tape delay. And actually, they don't have that deal anymore for this year. It's all strictly flow. There's no more of those USA, NBC Sports repeats for this year. That's no longer part of NASCAR's deal with the Comcast channels. NBC USA, all of their brands or whatnot. NBC Universal, that's what I was looking for. So it is just streaming. I don't think it'll ever get back to that. I think modified racing, just like a lot of other short track series, they have their niche, they have their market. It's the Northeast, basically. I like the growth that is happening down south right now. I think the Smart Tour is doing a good job, and then combining that with the Bowman Gray down there on a weekly basis during the summer month, I think the Southern Tour is definitely growing. I like that. I'd love to see More of those Southern teams come up here, and especially Race of Champions weekend, just to be greedy and make that a real battle of between the North and the South modified teams going at it. I'd love to see that. So I think there's some growth regionally. I don't see modified racing growing nationally. I just don't think short track regional grassroots racing is going to sell on live national television anymore. And I think streaming's the way to go.
Yep.
Race of Champions, we've got a great new partner we're back partnering with Racing America this year, the old Speed 51. Of course, Flow Racing does a phenomenal job covering short track racing as well too. So I think that's going to be the ticket, and just need to continue to grow that. And I think you combine their work with putting clips on social media and YouTube, and that'll draw eyeballs. No, it's not, like I said, it's not going to be live national television, but I think much in the way, if we could do it more like they do on dirt, basically. I think the way sprint car racing and late model racing has grown, just need to get everybody on the same page and keep a positive attitude and follow that model that the big national dirt series have laid out.
Yeah, for sure. Before we bring Jake on, I just wanted to ask you, Dave, give some love to our the ROC champion last year, Zane Ziner. Not probably a household name in the modified community. 9 top 5s in 11 races last year. Doesn't get much more consistent than that. What can you tell us about Zane and his quest for another championship this year?
Yeah, so Zane goes back to, the early 2000s on the Race of Champions series. He won a Race of Champions 200 at Oswego, and also won the late model race that weekend at Oswego too. And then he kind of disappeared for a little bit, stayed closer to home, started a family too. But over the last couple of seasons, we've seen Zane back with the Race of Champions series, and it's been great having him. And, he's got his own car, and also drives for someone else too. They kind of split the season up, so he's got a couple cars at his disposal. And they put together a phenomenal series. Back in 2022, Zane was going for the championship, and then a crash at Lancaster in August kind of took him out and opened the door for Mike Lee to win the series championship. And this year, he didn't have that big mistake that really hurt him in the point standings, and he was just super consistent. And like you said, 9 top 5s and 11 starts. He just had a phenomenal year, and no one was going to catch him because he didn't miss a step all season. So he had a phenomenal season. His son Gunnar now races. We've seen him in the Sportsman. We've seen him make a couple modified starts. So that's cool to have father and son racing together. But the Ziner folks, they're a great family that have been in modified racing in Pennsylvania and New York State for over 20 years.
And we're running out of time for this segment, but one more quick question about kind of young up-and-comers, Dave. I'm going to be selfish for a minute. I was a huge Jan Leedy fan as a kid. My all-time favorite modified driver. Third generation, Alyssa, is running the Sportsman this year. Mike is still running. I'm not sure if he's running full-time on the Race of Champions side. But what can you tell us about Alyssa getting into the Sportsman? Because I'm pretty pumped for that.
Yeah, quickly, Mike posted his schedule, and it looks like he's going to hit almost every Race of Champions event. Okay. I don't think like he's going to go to Mahoning, but he's going to hit most of the events. Mostly in that Brian DePasquale car I mentioned. But Alyssa, she's a chip off the old block. She's run in our 602 entry level division the last couple of seasons to get her feet wet, and she won at Spencer. Picked up 1 career win. Now she's going to try her hand at ease herself into the full-time sportsman racing. But the thing I love about Alyssa is she's really into it. You go when the Leedy folks, that L2 Autosport team that they had with Patrick Emerling, when they were helping Patrick out, when Pat was co-owning that with Joey Gase, that Emerling Gase Motorsports, they had those ARCA deals last year at Daytona. And Alyssa was in the pits, working on one of the ARCA teams last year. I think it was Natalie Decker drove for them, and she helped work on Natalie's car. So Alyssa is not just jumping behind the wheel. She's very hands-on with everything she does. She's a very smart girl, and she's very active in high school with the athletics and everything. But I think as she continues to get more seat time, and I think that's the biggest thing for her right now, is just more seat time, especially with more cars out there than like what she ran with in the 602 division. I think the sky's the limit for her, and I think she can be another member of the Leedy family to have a pretty illustrious career in racing.
Well, let's definitely hope so, because every time Keith posts pictures of the red and white blue 25 on Modifieds Daily, I can't like it fast enough. I absolutely one of my most favorite race cars of all time.
Yep.
Ditto here. I grew up watching that car just like you did, and I never pass up an opportunity to go shake Jan's hand when I see him in the pit area on race day.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Gonna bring on Jake Lutz here in a few minutes. Really enjoyed the conversation, and stay tuned. Be right back. If you're enjoying this podcast, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you have any show ideas or you want to be a part of the show, send me a message on social media at CDN Racing Tours. You can also email me, Sean, at cdnracingtours.com. All right, we're back, and we're joined by, and I'll try to do my best Dave Buchanan impression, out of Hamburg, New York, driving the Advantage Motorsports number 14. It's Jake Lutz. Jake, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, you did pretty good. Pretty good on that one. Appreciate you having me on.
And how does it feel to, as of 11 o'clock this morning, be the most important number 14 in Western New York?
Yeah, Stefan Diggs is out, huh? That's that was a bold move, but I guess we'll find out if it works out for us, right?
Before we get into kind of your career in racing and how you got started, you were in Richmond last weekend, working on the 14 for Bobby Santos. What was that experience like? How'd it go?
Yeah, that was a fantastic experience, to be honest with you. That was the first time we had ever been there. So, fresh notebook and, working with Bobby, total professional, sprint car guru. We ran with him at Oswego last year, so we kind of had a good feeling for, what he wanted out of a car, and Billy Putney gave him just that. So, had a pretty good run. Fired off a little off on the first run there, but worked on it throughout the race. And, Bobby had a good qualifying run and, finished fourth, and, everything's in one piece. So load it up and unload it and rescale it and get a notebook. And, first time being there, good run, good qualifying run. So can't complain. And that place is, a gorgeous facility.
Just Jake, what was it like kind of being in the, I don't know if all the cup haulers and everything were rolled in when you were in there, but just being around big time auto racing, being down there.
Yeah, it was cool. It was a cool experience. So when we pulled up to the facility, they had all their tires, the Goodyear tire trucks, kind of at the gate there and perfectly lined up, all the nice haulers. And we were on the backside, so they had the Xfinity guys and gals doing their inspection. So I think we were pit stall 24, and right behind us, they were doing the laser. So, it was pretty neat to see how they do it and, kind of compare the differences. Obviously, pretty major differences between what we have and what they have. But, it was a neat experience. We've never been at a facility with, the national series. So it was neat to see that.
I was going to ask you about Bobby Santos specifically, because I know he drove the 14 at Oswego last year. You were running the sportsman race. I was texting with Keith during the race, and I've been a follower of his since he started, like, racing super modifieds and NEMA midgets and all that kind of stuff. He's running 13th, 14th, half the race, 3/4 of the race, and then you look up and he's fourth. And that's kind of typical of him. You just, when it matters, he's there. What are you learning from him specifically about kind of how to drive these things as a young driver yourself?
Yeah, so looking back at Oswego, that deal was a little different, as you mentioned, because we were running the sportsman. So we were actually on the same radio channel all day. So I was able to hear him, kind of while I was strapping into the car, and then obviously during the race. So just his feedback. He's been doing this a long time. He's very successful, and he's a closer, right? So he's gonna put the car there at the end. He's gonna keep it in one piece. So just kind of the way that he goes about it, from P1 to the last restart. So being able to pick up on that feedback and kind of listen to how he strategizes throughout the race. What is he doing with the car? How is he? What's his pace like throughout the runs? and then the feedback to Billy Putney on what adjustments he needs. So, yeah, kind of be a sponge and listen to what feedback he has and learn from it.
So what's the different, how is the tire you're going to run for, you're running the 250 coming up.
Yep.
What's the tire going to be like in that race compared to what he was running in the tour race?
Yeah, so the Richmond deal, so Richmond and New Hampshire, they run a real hard tire. It's a 640 left and a 670 right side. So, the tub of the tire is harder, the sidewall is harder. So, there's really not much to compare there. Really, that durometer is as hard as like one of our old Sportsman tires. So it's a real hard tire. Where on the ROC for the 250 will be on M30s and M45s, which if I had to guess are probably 10 to 15 points softer. So you're gonna have that sidewall deflection. You're gonna it's gonna wear more, I would assume. So yeah, it's kind of hard to compare those two, especially just with that being a high pace, fast track at Richmond and New Hampshire, and then we go on the local circuit at these 3/8 half miles.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, so
very true. So is that the same car the same car he ran? Or is it two different?
Yep. So the tour races, we use our LFR. That's our dedicated tour car. And then the ROC, I'm going to be running a TA3 this year that we built last year. And it actually won the 250 last year with Patrick Emerling. So,
oh, hell yeah.
Excellent.
Awesome. Excellent.
All right, Jake, I just wanted to start kind of at the beginning. Kind of how did you get into racing, your family's background, and just kind of what led you to where you're at now?
Yeah, so my dad Jim raced Chargers, which is like a street stock back at Holland and Holland Speedway, and I'd say like the 88 to 90s. And then my older brother was born, so he gave that up and changed it to gave it up and started changing diapers for a couple of years, and got my older brother into go-karts, running locally. Langford Speedway, Merrittville up in Canada. I'm sure you're familiar with that. So, yep. Kind of looking after your older brothers, you kind of want to do what they do. And, when I turned 5, I got a go-kart running around the house there and started racing it. Didn't do so hot my first year. My dad basically sat me down at 5 years old and said, if you're not going to run hard, we're not going to spend money. So, that kind of flipped the switch in me, and next year we started running real good. So I did the dirt oval probably 3 or 4 years. So Merrittville, Ransomville, Langford, and then I got hooked up with Coyote Motorsports with the WK road course deal up in Rochester. So switched to that and had really good success there. Won the national championship in 2010, 2011, 2012, and then kind of what all the teams were doing back then were run that for a couple of years and go right to a legend car. So, we kind of followed script and bought a legend car, ran it at Lake Erie Speedway, and that was 2013. Finished second in points, ran pretty well. So then I was kind of at a crossroads. So I was playing lacrosse at the time. So that was my freshman year of high school, and to get recruited out of high school, it's not really your high school team; it's more your summer league team. So obviously that conflicted with race season. So I had a decision to make. So I decided to focus on lacrosse, and it worked out for me. I was able to get a scholarship to Lemoyne College in Syracuse, New York, and my senior year was COVID year. So 2020, the winter of 2020, going in 21. I started working with Advantage Motorsports, just kind of tinkering around in the shop and getting back into it when I was home for break, and graduated in May of 21 and said, do you guys still want me around helping out? And they said yes. So I think I graduated and finished school on May 30th with a national championship game, won that game. And on that Monday, I was wrenching away in the shop. So, that's here we are now. At the time, I was just a crew guy. And then, they had a driver at the time that they decided ways with. So I basically sat down Joe Stearns, the car owner, and Billy Putney, and said, can I just take it around Holland Speedway on a Thursday night practice session? And they let me do it and ran pretty good. Then we went to Lancaster, did the same, just practiced with it, ran pretty competitively. And then the following season was 2022. So that would have been my rookie season in the Sportsman.
Awesome.
Do you do 5 years of lacrosse or just the 4? Because I know with the COVID, guys got a 5th year.
No, I gave up my 5th year. So
all right.
I still have a year of eligibility if I ever get back and want to use
it. That's awesome.
Mercy Hirsch is going D1, so you should give him a call.
Yep. Lemoyne switched to D1 this past year, so we were D2 when I was there. But
Jake, with working with Advantage, you got Billy Putney, man's a legend, former Race of Champions winner. Joey Stearns is no slouch either, won a track championship at Lancaster. You've been, I'm assuming, been around guys like Chuck Hossfeld, of course, Patrick Emerling, Ronnie Silk drove for the team last year. Out of working with all those people, what is the best piece of advice you've gotten from working with some of those people?
Yeah, I can't really, solidify one piece other than just kind of be a sponge, right? So, you mentioned Ron Silk, Chuck Hossfeld, Bobby Santos, Patrick. Those guys have a lot of experience, a lot of wins. Silk won the Tour Championship last year, so. We ran together at Spencer as teammates, and just kind of same thing as with Bobby, just see how they kind of attack the day from practice to, through qualifying, through the heats, through the feature, and what they want from a driver's perspective, feeling wise in the car. So, not one specific, but just kind of a message, just be a sponge and, ask the right questions. All those guys are real easy to work with. So you just got to ask the right questions and they'll tell you.
Yeah, that's a pretty good group of drivers to be surrounding yourself with.
Yeah.
That's the cream of the crop right there. So I can't think of a better group of people to, be driving or have driven that car. And, I'm assuming you have notes from them, and that's that's awesome, man. That's good stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely a fantastic group, and we look at some of the checks on the wall that we got. Feels good to know that I was helping out during the week on the car at the shop, and I played some role in that perspective. So,
I wanted to get into this upcoming season, weather permitting. Let's hope the rain gets out of its system now, and we're good to go for next Saturday. First full season with the Tour, going for Rookie of the Year and maybe a championship as well. What are some of your personal goals and the team's goals for this upcoming season?
Yeah, start off, the ROC 250, obviously just a prestigious race nonetheless, and it's at Lake Erie. I've had a lot of success there the last couple of years, and it's arguably one of my favorite tracks. So, good track to start off the year with, but looking forward, we visited a couple new tracks that I've never seen. Mahoning. It's almost more like a go-kart track than a modified track, but nonetheless, you got to learn how to attack it, right? So, Evans Mills, I've never seen that place in person. So, long-term goal throughout the year, see these new facilities, pick up on some things and hopefully learn and keep the car in one piece. Focusing on the full schedule, Rookie of the Year. So, that plays into a different kind of, strategy when you go there. You're focusing on the points and how you want to kind of strategize your heat races, your qualifying, all that, where when you're not running for points, you can just kind of focus on that 60 lap feature at the end of the night. So, looking forward to it, and should be a good year.
So what's it like as a driver going to a track you've never even seen before, and then you have to, haul ass around that place? Like how do you tackle something like that?
Yeah, so honestly, I don't know if this is the right answer or the wrong answer, but I've always struggled with having someone tell me how to drive the track. I can kind of get a decent feel for it on, looking at pictures or videos, and then truthfully, I got to get out on, lap 1, lap 2 of practice and, get a feel for myself. So I understand, turns 1 and 3, you gotta, enter this high or enter this low, and turns 3 and 4, you might do the opposite. So, I can try to ask, but, I've always understood how to, attack a track just by getting out there and, being smart with it, right? You're not going to go in a turn 1 on your first lap at, 95 miles an hour and ruin everyone's day, right? So,
Jake, with Lake Erie coming up, one of the things that fascinates me about that place, it doesn't seem to build up rubber like other racetracks. You haven't run I don't think you've run the 250 yet, but you've raced there before. What is tire wear like at that racetrack? Because like I said, you just don't see that buildup of a line. It seems like the pavement stays the same color all day long. Maybe I'm wrong, but just my personal opinion from where I sit.
Yeah, I've only ran a Sportsman there. We don't have too much tire fall off with the Sportsman deal, but being around the modifieds long enough, you have 2,600 pounds and 600 and something horsepower, so you're gonna have tire wear no matter where you go. Lake Erie, the modifieds tend to like that higher line. You kind of keep your momentum built up, and once you start having to pass and you're kind of pinching off the corner, that's where you're going to start getting your tire wear because you're working the car a little more. So 250 laps it's a long time. So you got to get a good feel in that first 50, 60 lap run, and then make the adjustments at your pit stops to give you something at the end there. So it's a learning game. It's a long enough race where you might fire off out of the ballpark, and you got enough time to kind of work your way in the smaller circle.
I put out on Instagram that we were going to do this, and if anyone had any questions to let me know. So I did get a couple, so I want to get to those. Ryan wanted to know, what's your favorite track that the Race of Champions goes to?
Yeah, so forecasted that one, Lake Erie. Lake Erie is where I got my start in, I guess, full-size car, if you want to call that, if you want to call a legend car full-size, but anything other than a go-kart. Lake Erie is where I got my start. It's where I had my most experience. So it's a beautiful facility. The pits are beautiful. The track itself is beautiful. It's smooth. It's a little tricky. A lot of teams and a lot of guys, focus on that high second groove, but you can't play follow the leader, right? You got to be able to pass on the inside and get your run off. So that's kind of where the tricky aspect comes in, and how you want to set yourself up. So it's got to be my favorite track by far.
And the other one, and I really like this one, and this is something maybe Keith and Dave, you could jump in if you have anything you wanted to add to this question too. So there's Race of Champions Sportsmen, the Monaco Modifieds, SK Modifieds, Smart Modifieds, Wheelin'. What are the differences between the two? Can any of the cars just go run in any of the races, or are there any adjustments or things that need to be changed?
Yeah, so I think I heard SK in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll start with that. That's an easy one. So an SK it's a 2-barrel car. They have a ride height rule, shock rule. So the SKs that you see at like Stafford, I think they run M20s and M30s, which I think their open modifieds run the same tire up there as well. So, but the big thing is it's a wet sump. You don't have a separate oil tank, and a 2-barrel motor. So they're probably 150 to 200 horsepower less, I'd say, roughly.
Yeah.
When you start getting into like the Smart Tour, the ROC, the Whelen, each one kind of has its own rule, but from a, I guess, majority standpoint, you could take a Whelen car and run it at any series, but you can't do vice versa, right? You can't take a ROC with some of the things that they allow in their rule book and run it at a tour event.
From what I understand, the Whelen Tour is like super strict about having up-to-date safety stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas Monaco, I mean, you got to have legit stuff, but they're a little more lenient with the safety stuff. And I mean, you could run the same car for all three. I'm sure you'd have to make some adjustments. I guess you can run you don't have to run a steel roof in the Smart Mod Tour. You can run a what is it, particle, or I forget.
Fiberglass roof.
Yeah. So that's kind of like a quirky little, like they all have their different little rules and things like that. But for the most part, you could take a car and run all three. I would assume the modified tour though would cost the team the most to run. The whole, I don't know the specifics of it, but I'm sure, I'm sure you can tell us,
Yeah. So yeah, from a safety, it's not that they're passing, they're not,
Cost effective, more cost effective, Jake.
yeah, they're not doing, they're not turning a blind eye, right? It's just, the NASCAR stuff, like for instance, the right front spindle, you have a double tether, and it's 1/4 inch thick, where on, I believe any other series, at least the ROC series, it's 3/16 inches thick. So that's, what they ran forever. They changed that rule, I think, last year on the NASCAR tour. So, and that's because they're going to, larger tracks, faster tracks. So, something a little more thicker, and the double tether, I think, that came to fruition. I think Jimmy Blewett lost a right front at Thompson.
Yep.
And
over the wall.
So, yep. So, yeah, it's not that these other series are, turning a blind eye. It's just, that it costs a lot of money. All your tethers, your nuts, your shifter boots, that's every 2 years essentially that you're replacing everything. So, for your local guy, that adds up. And then from just total cost perspective, the tour deal, just from a manpower perspective, right? So you have over the wall guys that you have to get in the track. If you're at Richmond, like we were, you got to get a hotel room for them. You got to feed them. For the ROC deal, you have 3 guys over the wall. It's only an hour and a half from us. So, we're lucky in that perspective, but, yeah, the cost of the tour is definitely above, the ROC, the Monaco MRS series, Smart Tour, just from a per day races.
And we just got a few minutes left here, so I'll leave the last questions if Keith or Dave, you got anything else?
Are you gonna make your way down to New England? Maybe Stafford, Thompson, Waterford at some point?
I would love to. Stafford's like, circled on my whiteboard, right? It's just, you got to get the logistics to work out, right? So,
yeah.
One day, hopefully we can get a black and gold and 14 up that way, and, hopefully put a good run together. When, we'll have to see, wait and find out.
Jake, obviously, you know what you're talking about under the hood. Is it just come from the firsthand experience working in the shop and growing up around it, or what was your major at Lemoyne? Did you take some kind of engineering background, or where does your mechanical knowledge come from?
Yeah, just growing up, mechanically, just always been mechanically inclined, interested in anything that kind of has a motor and goes, right. When I went to Lemoyne, I focused on finance and analytics.
Okay. Good backup plan.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But from a modified knowledge, that's Bill Putney through and through. I probably ask him, I don't know, 5-6 questions every day, every time I see him, and I see him, 4 or 5 days a week. So, he's a good teacher. He, is willing to sit down and kind of tell me the why and how of things, and from modified knowledge, that's where I get it from for sure.
Jake, really appreciate you coming on. Just for those out there that maybe want to follow your season, where can they find you, your team, on social media, anything like that?
Yeah, so we have a Facebook page, Advantage Motorsports. Obviously, that's for our team updates, and then my personal page is just Jake Lutz. You can add me anytime. So.
Perfect, and I look forward to seeing you next Saturday. And I understand you'll have some hero cards available as well.
Yes, I will. Thank you to you.
Awesome. And Keith and Dave, thank you as well for coming on. This was awesome. Hopefully you can do it again sometime during the season. So thanks a lot, guys.